We are rapidly approaching the 2022 midterms, so of course, you know what that means. The lull that we've seen in internet censorship stories seems to be at an end, and we're starting to see the beginnings of the social media companies cracking down on the opponents of the Democratic Party. Now, we're going to talk about a couple of instances that are near and dear to my itty-bitty baby heart, but before we get into that, I want to transition over to one of my sponsors. It's Noble Gold, and by the way, credit to all the sponsors of this channel that keep this channel running and don't have to leave me subject to the whims of YouTube or Patreon or any of these companies that are just acting out of line and purging people for no particular reason other than political dispute. If you've been watching our channel regularly, you know that Noble Gold is a big sponsor of this channel, and they've helped thousands of people hedge against inflation and put their retirement, at least partially, into precious metals. And for this month, you guys will be rewarded if you sign up and open an IRA or transfer an IRA of about $20,000 to them with an American Virtue 3-ounce silver coin. If you go to $50,000 with them, then you will get an America the Beautiful 5-ounce coin. The number is 877-646-5347. The website is noblegoldinvestments.com. You know what to do. Again, supporting any of the sponsors is a way to support me, so thank you guys so much for doing so. Now, let's get into the main part of the story. So, what we're seeing across the internet.com is a bunch of different little instances that don't appear to be particularly connected of online censorship happening, and we're seeing it from multiple different social media companies. Some people are getting hit on multiple different fronts, and you may have heard already some of the stories that we're going to go into. However, I want to talk about Savanah Hernandez first and foremost, because in my video about Leah Thomas, I used Savanah Hernandez's interviews about what was going down with this person who was born male, transitioned into a female, and was basically smoking the women's swimming competition for the NCAA title.
Tech swimmer, what did you think about Leah Thomas competing today as a swimmer in this competition? What are you feeling? What are other athletes feeling?
It's a common conception that we are all very disappointed and frustrated with someone who has capabilities more than us women have to be able to compete at this level and take opportunities away from other women. Like, I have a teammate who did not make finals today because she was just bumped out of finals, and it's heartbreaking to see someone who went through puberty as a male and has the body of a male be able to absolutely blow away the competition, and you go into it with a mindset that you don't have a chance.
Now, I used this interview and I credited Savanah Hernandez in that video, but unlike Savanah Hernandez, I didn't get crushed for posting it. Savanah Hernandez got banned from Twitter for sharing this interview. She got restricted on YouTube, has 2 strikes, and is on the verge of being deleted, was suspended for a period of time from being able to upload, all because she did things like this and was able to get the word out to us and was able to provide us a very unique perspective that we don't usually get in these stories. Typically, when we talk about the trans issue in terms of women's sports, we have to discuss it in an abstract way. We never actually see or hear from the people who have to swim against these transgender athletes and how they feel about being smoked or going into it without a chance at all of winning. Savanah provided that for us. She went out, she did the work, she went out to this event, she interviewed people, she convinced them to be able to talk, which, by the way, is probably one of the most dramatic things that you can do, because the way that the LGBT lobby rolls in this country, you speaking out against any aspect, no matter how absurd, could end up getting you crushed, and she's facing all the consequences, and those clips are ending up on Tucker Carlson and absolutely everywhere. Everyone used Savanah Hernandez's work. A lot of people gave her credit, which she deserves, but Savanah is being punished for going out and doing the work for us.
And that's the thing, too, that we all should have learned from Alex Jones being banned, right? It was Alex Jones. He was crazy. He was a conspiracy theorist. Everyone was like, yeah, he deserves to be banned. No one else is going to get banned. And then as the years have progressed, we've seen more and more people get banned. And like you just talked about, Tim, if you're an independent journalist who's just getting into the game, you are not going to make it if you're willing to tell the truth. You're not going to make it if you're actually trying to go out on the street and go get those interviews and go viral. It's very difficult.
Rumble.
Yeah, Rumble, sure. it's growing. It's a new platform. But I mean, think about the fact that you, Candace Owens, Elijah Schaffer, Steven Crowder, a lot of these big names, you guys got really popular back in the day when YouTube was still the wild, wild west, when you could still say whatever you wanted on Twitter. Now it's really difficult to break into the space unless you're on an alternative platform like Truth Social or Locals, Rumble, all that stuff.
And that bothers me a lot, because anybody who works in this industry will tell you to the person that the way that it works on YouTube or any of these social media companies is that you have moments, but behind those moments are years of hard work and years of grinding. Savannah Hernandez is not just somebody who goes out and does these interviews on the street in front of the camera, trying to get people to click because, oh, look, I'm interviewing a person, isn't this funny? Savannah has spent years working behind the scenes as a producer, editing her own videos, editing videos for The Blaze, and basically building up to this point, and to have it snatched away from her by social media companies who don't like her messaging, even though her messaging is perfectly sensible, specifically on this issue, is shameful, and it's sad. That's one of the reasons why I'm going to direct you guys to support Savannah, because she needs it right now, and if she gets deleted, we would have never gotten those perspectives. If she was not able to do this, we would be worse off as a community, because the people that actually go out onto the street and get the interviews are putting in work. They're putting in the costs, and they deserve the credit. This is one of the reasons why when a lot of people talk crap about Elijah Schaffer, I point out that Elijah goes out into the riots, gets assaulted, by the way, to get footage that all of us rip for free. So you can say whatever you want about any of these people and any of their political views, but they're actually doing the work, the cost prohibitive work, and they should reap some of the benefits of that success. So obviously, Savannah Hernandez, absolutely wonderful person. She's actually going to be speaking with me at a Better Discourse event coming up April 23rd, which we talked about and I've advertised. I'll link the tickets of that in the description. And she's somebody that I've known for a few years after meeting her at one of these events, and she definitely deserves it for all the work that you don't see behind the scenes that goes into producing the content. Don't let these social media companies censor her when she's just rising up to the point where she's getting the success that she's earned. Now, obviously, it's not just Savannah Hernandez who is feeling the extent of this crackdown. Charlie Kirk was actually banned off of Twitter despite him being the turning point guy, somebody that people often label conservative ink, which just goes to show you the power that the transes lobby has over these social media platforms, that even somebody who's considered relatively mainstream like Charlie Kirk with a verified account with an organization that has a national scope is not safe if he tweets the wrong opinions about the transes. On top of that, Babylon Bee, a comedy satire site that's absolutely hilarious, has also been restricted under the premise that they need to delete one of their jokes in order to be compliant with Twitter. Now, Twitter has played this game before, and they played it with more serious stories. This is the precedent building to do that again ahead of the midterms and ahead of the 2024 presidential election. Remember, they blocked people from even sharing the link to the Hunter Biden laptop story, even in direct messages. So not only just tweeting it out to the public, they blocked it in the DMs, and everything in that story turned out to be 100% true. And on top of that, the allegations, the accusations, the justification of Twitter saying that it was hacked material was totally false. They literally had Hunter Biden's laptop. They didn't hack into it in the cloud to disseminate it. And by the way, we know for a fact, for sure, 100%, that they would allow people to publish leaked documents of the other side because they weren't restricting people who had published years of Trump's tax returns. These were actually obtained illegally. These actually had negative legal consequences about them. But Trump, orange man bad, therefore, who really cares? Biden corruption, we can't talk about that. We have an election to win, and we have a public to mislead. And by the way, even though the New York Post is a tabloid, even though the New York Post doesn't have the best reputation overall, I do need to point out that this was a newspaper founded by Alexander Hamilton, the guy that was on the $10 bill, the first Treasury Secretary of the United States of America, a guy who existed in a period of time where you could be the first Treasury Secretary in the United States of America's history and also die in a duel with Thomas Jefferson's vice president over a political disagreement. That is the man that founded that paper, that historic paper, that Twitter, this upstart, this new company in the grand scheme of things, decided was not allowed to report what they wanted to report. That's how soft we've become as a nation, and that's how strong these tech companies have become in their ability to censor, and that's how thuggish the transes lobby has become over the years. So yeah, you need to back up all of the people that got banned under this, but specifically and especially Savanah Hernandez. Now, it's not just Twitter, it's not just YouTube, it's not just Facebook. Obviously, the payment processors are also getting in on the game. Recently, Cindy Watson, the Australian menace, friend of the channel, but she is a menace to society, was banned off of Patreon without notice. And by the way, it appears if you were a contributor to Sydney Watson's Patreon, they took your money. They're holding it. They're not refunding it. Nobody knows where it is, but apparently Patreon declares the right that they can ban you and rob your audience, much in a similar way as GoFundMe did with the whole trucker convoy.
So I was just minding my own business yesterday, building my Sydney clone army, if you will, and I got a very fun email from Patreon. And as you probably guessed, they have banned me from the platform for hate speech. For hate speech!
Now, Patreon is a little bit different than any of these other companies. They're not really a social media thing. They're a mechanism in order to process payments so that you can support the creators that you want to support. They should not have political opinions. What they should do is debit the money from one account and credit it to another account. But in another way that Patreon is different is that at some point, Patreon actually tried to be transparent with the public. During the ban of Lauren Southern, which we all should remember, Patreon claimed that they had a very specific standard that didn't allow human judgment or political bias, and therefore Lauren Southern was banned. And if you're not Lauren Southern, if you don't do the same things as Lauren Southern, you won't be banned for the Patreon because that's not how they roll. And that standard, classically, was something called manifest observable behavior.
Content policy and the decision to remove a creator page has absolutely nothing to do with politics and ideology, and has everything to do with a concept called manifest observable behavior. The purpose of using manifest observable behavior is to remove personal values and beliefs when the team is reviewing content. It's a review method that's entirely based on observable facts. What has a camera seen? What has an audio device recorded? It doesn't matter what your intentions are, your motivations, who you are, your identity, your ideology. The trust and safety team only looks at manifest observable behavior. We get rigorous and specific because we're talking about removing a person's income. The authority to take away a human being's income is a sobering responsibility. It is not something to be done on a whim. And as a creator myself, I've had videos taken down. I always want Patreon to put creators first. The reason Patreon exists is to give creators power and income, to give creators a voice, a seat at the table.
And the way that this allegedly worked, according to Jack Conte, the CEO of Patreon at the time, he might still be to this day, I don't really know, didn't look into it, was the idea that you actually had to do something that had consequences or could very likely lead to consequences in the real world in order to get censored by Patreon, because they took your income being taken away from you very seriously. And this wasn't about political opinions or bias or anything like that. It was all about your behavior in the real world, your actual actions and the consequences of those actions. So Patreon, even though they banned a conservative creator, even though they banned somebody whose star was on the rise, and by the way, Lauren Southern's still around, still insanely successful, will also be at Better Discourse for, tickets below. They were saying, look, it was because she was out on a ship and she was saying things and it looked like it was a problem, and we don't want our company tied in with an international incident. That's not good press for us. It shouldn't be good press for you. Now, the thing is, Patreon stated the standard, but they were already banning people for political positions, but then they cemented it with the very public banning of Sargon of Akkad for saying something on a live stream that was not only not on Patreon, but it was also not on his own channel. He was a guest on a live stream, and he used the N-word to describe the alt-right, but if you listen to the context in which he used it, he was basically saying that they act like the way that they describe the N-words act. They are the problem. They are the bad people. Every stereotype that they're projecting onto black people that they would call the N-word, which obviously the only way this statement works is if you acknowledge that that's not something you're supposed to do, is actually how they're acting in his chat. So he was calling them that to make a very specific point. And I know now everybody says no context at all whatsoever is that word to ever be used by a white guy. But in context, everyone who's not acting deliberately in bad faith could acknowledge precisely where Carl was coming from, understand what he meant, and they should not be offended. And if they are offended by that, if that does bother them, then that should be treated as a personal problem. But then Patreon said basically they can get involved in any aspect of your life, anything on any platform or even off platform, and use that as a justification to ban you, which is why Sydney Watson, who apparently wasn't even posting on Patreon, she basically left it to die. She wasn't active on the site, was banned despite not posting anything on Patreon for, I believe she said, almost a year.
Of course, I emailed them back asking what precisely I did that went against their community guidelines and what precisely constitutes as hate speech, because if you're going to ban me, I would like to know what I did specifically. And also, if I'm going to appeal it, I would like to know what precisely I'm appealing. I think it's worth mentioning too that I never actually made any content on Patreon or posted any content on Patreon itself, which means that this decision is entirely predicated on everything I've done everywhere else. And they even confirmed this in an email that they just sent me. They don't tell me which content has offended them, but they do note that when reviewing, we take into consideration the content shared on Patreon, as well as any activity taking place outside the platform.
Now look, Sydney likely is going to be fine. She's been successful for a long time, but with the whole "you are here" thing and her channel getting even more views, she's going to be okay. But it's the principle of the thing. If they could ban somebody who's a rising star, somebody who's prominent, somebody who doesn't even promote anything on their site, not give an explanation when she tried to appeal, reject the appeal immediately, and seize the money, they can do that to almost anybody. Sydney obviously has a well-suited army of supporters. Just go ask Jack Murphy how attacking her worked out for him if you need a bit of clarification on that, and she's going to be okay. I believe she's even thinking about setting up a subscribe store. If she did already at the time of me shooting this video, I will actually link it in the description of this video. But until then, unless you see something confirmed from her or linked in this video, don't see it as legitimate or anything like that, but give her your support. And by the way, while I am saying, because Sydney said in her own video, the consequences of her losing her Patreon aren't going to be that significant for her, it's not like she's a stranger to bans. It's not like other things haven't gone wrong with these companies, including odd companies that you never think of when you think about banning somebody. Sydney Watson, I mean, again, she is the Australian menace, so there may be an explanation for this, is actually banned from Uber.
Seeing as we're on the topic, I'd like to know why I'm banned from Uber. I just want to order some fries.
Now, I know somebody out there has already written this in the comments, and somebody's probably going to write it in the live chat of my premiere, and it's probably appeared a bunch of times, that private companies can do whatever they want, and normally, I 100% agree. Even if I don't like it, I 100% agree. However, she's banned from Uber. That means that her natural right to order Uber Eats and pay $14 in extra fees for them to drive the food over to her, fees that she could have avoided just by calling the restaurant itself and going through their own delivery system, has been violated. Everybody deserves the right to be buried in Uber fees that ultimately end up costing more than the few tacos that you got from Taco Bell. Also, I don't know if you guys know this, but the prices on Uber Eats are higher than in the restaurant to compensate for the fees that they charge to the restaurant. Those are Sydney's natural-born rights as an American. I know she's an Australian menace, but I believe she was born in America and she's at least half American, so she's only half a menace. And they're being violated by the company of Uber, and there doesn't appear to be an explanation. Now, before I let this video go too far off the rails, because by the way, I definitely would let this video go way too far off the rails, I do need to focus on the serious point, because as I said earlier, we're approaching the midterms. We have a Supreme Court nominee currently in hearings. There's a bunch of primary elections that are either coming up or have already passed, so the censorship ramping up at this point, at the behest of the Democratic Party, should be troubling to all of you. You guys can say private companies can do whatever you want. You don't have a right to be on these platforms. You don't have a right to spend $18 on fees for Uber Eats for food that actually costs $5. But in reality, these are all ways of silencing opposition, and private companies doing it is much different from private companies doing it at the behest of one political party. What's going on in this country is shameful. We've seen the internal communications. We've seen people at the White House express publicly that they need tamp downs on misinformation. This is the social media companies, the payment processors, following the orders of the administration. And by the way, there was a formal version of this policy during the Obama administration. Operation Choke Point was used to deny banking to a bunch of people who sold guns. Federally licensed firearm dealerships were being pressured, or actually the payment processors for these companies were being pressured by the Obama administration under the guise of this somehow being a crackdown against criminality and all the consequences that they would wield against them. So we've seen the formal version of this. Maybe the Biden administration's Justice Department will bring that back. But right now, they don't need to, because the social media companies and the payment processors are acting on behalf of them in informal ways. It's all a problem when it's coming from the government, and make no mistake about it, it's coming from the government. Now, with that being said, that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about all this down in the comments below. If you like this video, you can show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links. This has been me talking about the purge that's going on right now and probably will get worse. Till next time.